Alright, okay. Thank you very much. It's a long day, but hopefully a productive day. Essentially, we only live for maybe, how many years, I don't know, maybe 20, 30, maybe 40, 50, 100 years maximum. And we've got plenty of work to do in our short lives. And that's where I think I've had a sort of a similar point made. I've had similar points made with some other team members in the operations team and core team also, which is we just haven't got time. So every single moment is precious, and that's where we are doing these intense courses. But thank you for all the patience and the support and so on. Life was intense. In the first century for the apostles, it wasn't easy. They had their lives at stake. And so I think we haven't, I don't think we have gone to that extent at all. All that we've done is maybe spend a few hours, which is not a great deal in comparison to maybe put in a Roman prison of the first century where all sorts of things could happen to you, or head being chopped or whatever else. Yeah. So through God's grace, part of the challenge in Operation Stephen is, of course, we're doing the theoretical training now. We also, God strengthening, working on practical outreach trainings. How to put some of these arguments into practice. And sister actually just yesterday gave a very interesting idea to be explored. But essentially the thing is, one after another we're going to bring together a holistic program of learning theory, learning practice, but also being discipled while going through all of that. And part of that discipleship is going to be this idea that we need to live for God. There is no other option. If God gave His precious life for us, then my life is not even worth a fraction of what He gave for me. And so, but this is the best I could give, so I need to give. And likewise, we all need to. And if Christians gear up to that extent, if not millions, at least thousands in a country, and I'm sure there are plenty of well-meaning Christians in nations like ours, but well-meaning isn't sufficient. And there are plenty of Christians who are sacrificial, submissive, humble and so on. Those things are also not sufficient. This is a war. We are in the thick of war, thick of battles. We need to be all out for God in all sorts of different ways. Anyway, hopefully, through God's grace. And I've been considering lately what would happen if I'm put in prison. And part of the leading by example is to be prepared for those things also. Anything and everything for God, Christians need to gear up to. So in that regard, I'm really happy we're going through intense training. But having said that, I do appreciate your patience and kindness and good feedbacks and all those things. So thank you very much. So the last couple of sessions, of course, the overall module, the question, the topic for the module is evidence that back up the Bible. Why do we trust the Bible? That's the overall module topic. First couple of sessions we looked at Old Testament, and there pretty much many things matter. Now we have moved on to the New Testament. Like what we did with the Old Testament, it's going to be two-session idea, where this session I'm going to go through the straightforward case first, without caring about challenges people have raised. Just go through the straightforward case first, lay out the case, and in the second session we'll try and see what challenges people are raising against our straightforward case and try and see how to deal with those challenges. So that's the broad structure for this session and next session. The one thing which is unlike what it is in the Old, what it is for the Old Testament, is that unlike for the Old Testament, where many things mattered, in the New Testament, and as a matter of fact, if you put the entire Bible together, there is nothing that matters as much as specifically 3 or 4 days in history, which is Jesus' death, judicial process, death, burial, resurrection. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a very important point here, which is, if that is true, if Jesus died and came back alive, it is possible we could even logically, coherently, meaningfully say, I don't care what comments you have about the Old Testament. I really don't care. If you see what I mean. If this is true, He is God. Period. That could be the end of an argument in itself. And quite logically, credibly so. I mean, it's not a whimsical point. It's a very credible, holistic point. The resurrection is true. End of discussion. Everything else falls in place. And that's very important. In other words, what we dealt with the last couple of sessions are purely for the sake of being comprehensive in what we do, or exhaustive in what we do. But this is the most. If you only have 2 hours to train yourself in, this is our Lord Jesus Christ, and especially death, burial, resurrection. Did that happen or not? Okay, having said that, what I'm going to do is, even though I said New Testament, I'm going to now revise, and I'm going to say, my focus is going to be purely on Jesus' life. And once that's settled, everything else will fall in place. And so, whether Paul went around my claim to have gone around, and all those things are purely sort of extra bonus points. This is the case. Now, the first topic, the first heading, which we cover in 20 seconds in this module, is that New Testament, the context is historical. New Testament has plenty of information about people, about geography, about places, about politics, about economics, all sorts of different things. In the Gospels, in the book of Acts, and elsewhere, and so on. And so far, there has not been found anything which is incorrect. We are really talking about 100 plus specific details about history, which is sort of secular history, not the religious part. And so that determines the context of what happened, and that is certainly historical. Now, some of us have joined, Anna is new here, and maybe a few more on the live chat here on Operation Stephen, and not sure how many followed Module 1 in SOCO also. Some of us are new, so you might not be familiar with the book that I showed last time around. So I've written a couple of books. One of those books corresponds to this, establishing the historical Jesus to be God. And there I dealt with this context is historical in a slight more detail. Giving just some information about geography and politics and so on. But today I'm just going to say, please take my word for it for now, and then we'll progress ahead. And the reason is I really wanted to spend time on this. If you spend much time on that, which I tend to do because I speak a lot, if I start on a topic, I find it hard to control myself. So I'm through design avoiding that. Coming to this, Jesus' life, teaching, death, burial, resurrection, and divinity. Let's start out there. And the plan is, we're essentially going to go through 9 specific pieces of historical evidence. Unlike when we were dealing with the Old Testament, here, thankfully, these are literary. Stones don't talk much. So if you find something in the stone and then it just says Omri, son of so and so, well, okay, it's good. But here we are talking about language. We're talking about expressions. Sometimes even narrations of events which have been preserved in these documents, which is much better. And so I'm quite keen to get on that. So Evidence 1, as let's go through them one by one. Tacitus. Shall we go through the names alone first, please? Tacitus, Josephus, Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, Lucian of Samosata, Census, and then finally Babylonian time. These are people, that's a book. Yeah, so we're talking about those people. In regards to Tacitus, we're talking about Annals, Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, Pliny the Younger, a particular letter that he wrote, Suetonius, the lives of the 12 Caesars, the same book, but a couple of different passages, just like for Josephus, Lucian of Samosata, a particular satirical story that he wrote, of which the protagonist, the hero, the center guy, was this man called the protagonist. So learning English, some of these pronunciations is a bit hard for me, but thankfully we have people around. So when I know my pronunciation is not right, I'll normally ask that just so others don't miss my point. So thank you, brother. So the Peregrinus is that guy there. And yeah, so that's the rough collection of evidence that we're going to see. Evidence that we're going to see. And what I'm hoping to do, is there any problem with the live stream?
No.
No, okay. Not sure.
Let me try then.
There's no problem with the live stream. Okay, cool. Alright. What I'm hoping to do, once we read through some of the details, what I'm hoping to do is essentially reconstruct a crux of the life of Jesus, purely using the sources that I've just mentioned so far. That's the idea. If I can do that, it's pretty much like learning about Jesus from outside the Bible. And there's a particular reason I'll do that. I'll get that later. That's the idea. Now, what do I mean by crux of the life of Jesus? Jesus is a very popular name of first century Judea and also various other points in time in Judea. But the fact of the matter is, sorry. The fact of the matter is, we're talking about a very particular Jesus. Despite the fact that it's a very popular name, we know who we are talking about, and he is, in the entire history, reasonably, uniquely identifiable as someone who was claimed to be the Messiah in the first century, and so on. So we're talking about a very particular Jesus who had disciples, who had extravagant claims about himself, even to the extent of claiming to be God, who had a completely new teaching on top of the Old Testament, signs and wonders, miracles. Jewish leadership were offended. Jewish people planned to destroy him. Jewish people accused him before the Romans. Romans took him, condemned him, and he was crucified. Jesus' early disciples believed that he came back alive. They worshipped him, both before the resurrection and after. The early church was persecuted right in Jerusalem and elsewhere, but certainly in Jerusalem, persecuted. And the early church grew from Jerusalem. And these are important points, right from Jerusalem. I'll tell you why in a bit after making some other arguments. But I think most of the terms there are very important, most if not all terms. Now, for instance, if Muslims or some other people come and say, oh, Jesus was just a regular law-abiding Jew, some of these points would stare them at their face. No, he had extravagant claims. Clearly, he had a recognizably, demonstrably a new teaching. He was not a teacher of just the existing stuff. He taught new stuff. To an extent, claims of him were considered extravagant. during his time. Miracles, signs and wonders, people were offended, and you know the particular reasons why they were offended and so on. And Jewish leadership planned to destroy him and so on. You see what I'm saying? So each point has a reason why it's there, and once put together properly, once understood properly, essentially the point would be that is the Christian view. Any other view of people who like to use Jesus just wouldn't fit in here. Cool, okay. So having said that, if you look at the second column there, each column, as you can see, what I've done is I've given numbers for each evidence. Evidence 1, 2, 3 and so on, yeah. Going up to 9 here. And what you find is, for example, the source 1 actually gives us information about particular Jesus' disciples, Roman condemnation and so on. So essentially using them, you can really construct the entire story. Entire crux is, I guess, the point. For Roman condemnation, you have at least 2 sources testifying. So when you use those 9 sources, you really have no column left not filled in. In other words, when put together, they can tell you the exact crux without even using the Bible. Yeah, so far with me? On that? Yeah? Alright, cool. So now what we'll do is just go through the sources one by one. For simplicity's sake, I'm even ignoring descriptions of the writers, but bear in mind these are not simpletons. These are massive individuals. This is, for example, a guy who is of the stature of Pontius Pilate, but also on top of being a governor like Pontius Pilate, he was a very, very qualified historian. His historical works are some of the best available from the first century, second half of first century. He was governor of a region of Turkey and so on. So that's a quick summary. The point is, each one of these guys are very prominent guys. They're not simpletons, they're not nobodies talking about some stuff. All possible, credible people who could talk about Jesus did talk about Jesus, is I guess one of the important points. Okay, now, but for simplicity's sake, I'm ignoring all that because I really want to dwell on the actual content of what they said. But more details on the context and so on are available in that book for people to check, certainly. Okay, now let's read this together, please. Annals 1544. So this is in relation to Emperor Nero of Rome. Of course, Tacitus was a governor under the Roman emperor. So he was sort of, in that region, he was second in command, sort of thing. Apart from the emperor, who was a centralized figure, in this region, he is number 1. Okay, he now talks about something that happened during the time of Nero, and this passage is about that. But neither human help, nor imperial munificence, nor all the modes of placating heaven could stifle scandal or dispel the belief that the fire had taken place by order. The fire that he's talking about is the fire in Rome, which Emperor Nero was accused of having caused, and in that context he's making some comments. Fire had taken place by order. So people were trying, Nero was trying hard to say, well, the fire wasn't because of me, but no one seems to take that on board. Therefore, to scotch the rumor, Nero substituted as culprits and punished with the utmost refinements of cruelty a class of men loathed for their vices, whom the crowd styled Christians. So, people are accusing Nero. Nero wants to find some other scapegoat. Who is he using? Christians. Who are called Christians? Who are these Christians? Christus, the founder of the name. So Christians are apparently just named after the founder of their group. Had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius Caesar by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilatus. And the pernicious superstition was checked for a moment, only to break out once more, not merely in Judea, the home of the deceased, but in the capital itself, where all things horrible and shameful in the world collect and find their vogue. This passage itself is a remarkable passage in the way he presents 20 different ideas in just 5 or 6 lines like that. Remarkable, and that's part of what Tacitus is known for. Succinct, clear, accurate history is what he writes, and that we understand not alone through this passage, from the rest of his writing. What someone else might have taken 10 different statements to explain, he will just use one statement with the right words, put in the right order to clarify, to communicate. So, what do we find there? We find a group called Christians he is talking about. Who are these Christians? Christians. So, in terms of timeline, in terms of what we understand about what Nero did to the group that he did, plus adding up the other things, what we understand is these are clearly in reference to Christians that we call Christians today. And clearly, Christus is the founder. It seems Christus is acknowledged as the leader of that particular group. So, element 1, particular Jesus, obviously is talking about one particular person who he isn't even naming as Jesus but as Christ, which is the unique way you can identify Jesus as the Jesus of the Bible as opposed to any other Jesus. When I say Jesus of the Bible was the Messiah in the first century. A couple of other Jesuses in the Bible also. Joshua is Jesus again, but in a slightly different context. Okay, so Christus, the founder of the name, had undergone, so he's testifying for the fact that he had disciples. He's testifying for the fact of Roman condemnation, sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilatus, persecution of the early church in Jerusalem and growth of the early church in Jerusalem. How do we get to know those things from here? He speaks about this pernicious superstition which comes from that group. Whether they were accused fairly or not in relation to the fire, he gives a description of the group. And the description is that they were following a pernicious superstition. But he says was checked for a moment, coming from the mouth of a procurator, a governor. Checked for a moment. What kind of means would he have employed to check things, to keep things in control? Check for a moment, only to break out once more. Look at the language used. An official governor is saying, I tried to control, but things went out of hand again. So we're not talking about me trying to speak, try and negotiate with my neighbor. We're really talking about someone who would have tried all things which were available at his disposal to make sure these people weren't spreading pernicious superstition, but they still managed to break out once more. Not merely in Judea. So clearly he's testifying there was persecution in Judea, the home of the disease. He calls it pernicious superstition, now he calls it a disease. But in the capital itself, Rome, where all things horrible or shameful in the world collect and find a war. So you see, when put together, you find the Romans condemned him, persecution, and the growth of early church. How could, when he tried to check, it could break out once more? Break out once more, not alone to stay inside Judea, but also to spread, even going to Rome and so on. So clearly he is giving the story of persecution and growth despite persecution here. Now the point is, so we collected those things from you. 1, 2, 9, 13, 14. So if I just show you here. 1, 2, number 1 is 1, 2, 9, 11, 13, 14. You see how the table has been constructed. Okay. 10 seconds break. JC is changing battery.
There is a question. Can somebody ask Arul for the year of the letter?
What was what? The letter?
Yeah, the year of the letter.
So here's where more details in the book. Essentially, Tacitus lived in the second half of 1st century and he died early 2nd century. So the worst case or the latest case for this particular, this is not a letter, this is really a history book. The worst case scenario, the latest case scenario is early 2nd century. but an average case scenario is late 1st century. So we're really talking about a few decades after the ascension of Jesus. Now, the question asked for the sake of the other audience, especially on live chat, what is the date for Tacitus writing? Most of these people are really second half of 1st century people. Most of these writings, if not second half of 1st century or latest first half of 2nd century. In other words, pretty early for someone who wasn't a disciple. Of course, these aren't following Jesus, trying to interview him and stuff like that. So you wouldn't expect them to. The other thing is, you don't have a 1st century historian during the time of Jesus available at all in the first half of 1st century. Who is there? No one. So the earliest possible records are from these people. Okay, Josephus. What does Josephus say? He is a Jewish historian. His life is interesting. Jew by origin, Jew by ethnicity, but he had friendship with Roman, friendship in Roman circles and so on. He was with the Romans for some time, with the Jews. The Jews thought he was betraying them, so all sorts of complex things like that. But regardless of all those things, he is certainly a 1st century Jewish historian who Jews take seriously today. So he's written 2 main books, both of which are related to Jewish history. One of which is Antiquities of True Trial. I can't even pronounce properly now. Even the words I can pronounce otherwise. My lips are failing me. So one book given references there. Let's read the first passage there. When therefore Ananias was of this disposition, Ananias is the high priest, who is understood to be Ananias of the Bible. When therefore Ananias was of this disposition, he thought he had now a proper opportunity to exercise his authority. Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had found an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. So clearly Jesus, the one who, when you add that, we're talking about one particular person, who is Jesus Christ of the Bible. So there's no confusion. And people have known it. If you use this qualification, it's Jesus of the Bible. And so he goes on to say, his brother was accused and then as a breaker of the law and delivered to be stoned. So we understand this is a record of Jesus, our Jesus, Jesus of the Bible, and possibly he's talking about persecution of the early church in Jerusalem. Clearly, someone here was accused of breaking the law. For all those who want to say that, especially Muslims and also some of the other cultic groups, which see Jesus as the person who obeyed the Mosaic law and that's all he did. Clearly that wasn't the case time and time again. 1st century people clearly took Jesus and his followers to be breakers of the law systematically. So accused of that, and delivered them to be stoned. Okay, so that's Josephus. Particular Jesus, possibly persecution of early church in Jerusalem. And the only reason I say possibly is because, of course, here we're not talking about a group. We're only talking about one named individual and maybe a few others with him. And that's why I haven't extended that to the entire church. Just so we are accurate in what we're doing. Josephus, another important passage, much more popular than the other passage. Let's read the entire thing first. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men, among us had condemned him to the cross. Those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day. Now, interesting passage. Manuscripts of Josephus are preserved historically, were preserved in the Christian world, because of course when I say Christian world, I mean at least by self-recognition of Christians. I'm not talking about whether they were sincere Christians or not, that's a different story. But the point here is, because of the fact that manuscripts corresponding to Josephus were around in a place where there was quote-unquote church, people undermine some of these. And so, one of the things they do is, some specific portions of this passage they claim, similar to the red letter argument we were talking about earlier. They say, well, some of these doesn't seem to have come from Josephus himself. It seems to have been things which other Christians might have added. When I say other Christians might have added in the centuries after Josephus, just to suit them. And there are particular arguments against this, which enters into plenty of detail as to why that can't be the case. But again, these kinds of arguments would go on forever. But sufficient is to say for me right now, you see the parts I have italicized there. You can pretend they didn't exist here. Josephus never wrote this. The parts italicized. Pretend they were not written by Josephus. Even then, without that, we still have enough information for us to deal with what we want to deal with. Anything else on top, which I think would be plenty. I personally, based on the reasons I have read and reading up on the life of Josephus also, I have reasons to think that he most likely would have written the entire stuff. But even ignoring that for now, we're going to see the remaining stuff is useful. Anything on top would be just bonus. Particular Jesus' disciples, new teaching, miracles, Jewish accusation, Roman condemnation, crucifixion. Particular Jesus a wise man, a teacher, a doer of wonderful works. Both Jews and Gentiles were his followers. He was killed at the hand of Pilate. So what Jesus comes to mind? The Jesus of the Bible. So he was talking about a particular Jesus who had disciples who were both Jewish and Gentile disciples. New teaching. Obviously the principal men did not like what he was doing, and so on. So he drew over to him as if there is some sort of a drawing to him, as opposed to purely saying, I'm only talking about the Old Testament, if you see what I mean. I'm talking about something special on top, and therefore I'm asking you to come to me. So expressions like these, the tone of the expression, the way in which things are portrayed, clearly suggests some additional stuff which might not be obvious in simple reading. And that is why new teaching, to me, when expressions like that are used, drew over, to me that is suggestive of something special happening on top of merely the Old Testament. So new teaching, miracles, doer of works, he says. He was a doer of wonderful works. Jewish accusation, principal men among us led him to Pilate to be condemned. Roman condemnation, of course, Pontius Pilate himself was involved to crucify him. And crucifixion was the mode of punishing Jesus. So those things we get from there. Pliny the Younger. How are we doing in terms of time? We need to rush through. In the meanwhile, the method I've observed towards those who have been denounced to me. So Pliny the Younger is writing a letter to a Roman emperor, and essentially the context of this is he's asking for suggestion as to how to deal with Christians. To him, it seems like these people are misbehaving. I've tried a few things. If you have a better idea, please let me know. And while he's asking for help, he's also trying to be friends, be in good terms with the emperor. So a couple of things happening simultaneously. So that's the context. In the meanwhile, the method I've observed towards those who have been denounced to me as Christians is this. This is what I've done. I interrogated them whether they were Christians. If they confessed it, I repeated the question twice again, gave them another chance, adding the threat of capital punishment. Who is this Pliny the Younger, by the way? He is similar to Pontius Pilate and Tacitus. He is another governor. Again, late 1st century, most part of his life. Governor with power. So if he condemns, and he also ruled he also governed in the region, in another region of Turkey. So if he threatens, it's a real threat. It's not some wishful thinking. This is you're proper dead if you don't listen. If they still persevered, I ordered them to be executed. For whatever the nature of their creed might, I don't care what their beliefs are. Whatever nature their creed might be, I could at least feel no doubt that contumacy and inflexible obstinacy deserve chastisement. I don't care what their rationale is, but if they are insistent that they would stand firm in what they believe, despite me asking them to reconsider, I'm going to kill them. It just doesn't work in my realm. They have to reconsider. They have to, multiculturalism and all sorts of things that we talk about. They have to give up. If they don't, purely for the sake of them not doing that, I execute them. There were others also possessed with the same infatuation, but being citizens of Rome, I directed them to be carried thither. They affirmed, however, what did they do? They affirmed, however, the whole of their guilt. What did the Christians do? The whole of their guilt or their error was that they were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day. Before it was like early in the morning they gathered together when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God. So clearly, in his view, Christ was worshipped as God, and that was systematically done. Week in, week out, they gathered together on what would most likely be Sunday, based on other resources that we have, and bound themselves by a solemn oath not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon deliberator. After which it was their custom to separate and then reassemble to partake of food, seemingly talking about communion. Food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind. It seems like there was accusation of whether the eating the flesh and drinking the blood sort of thing inaccurately. It seems like there's a chance that kind of idea was floating around even that time. So he's just confirming, no, I can clarify, that's not what they're doing. They're just having innocent food, ordinary kind, not some secret whatever. I therefore adjourned the proceedings and betook myself at once to your counsel, for the matter seemed to me well worth referring to you, especially considering the numbers endangered. Plenty of people, persons of all ranks. What kind of people? All age, all ranks, all age and ages, of both sexes, and will be involved in the prosecution. And of both sexes are and will be involved in the prosecution. For this contagious superstition, remember, Tacitus says pernicious superstition. He's saying contagious superstition is not confined to the cities only, but has spread through the villages and rural districts everywhere. The message of Jesus was everywhere. Followers of Jesus, all sorts, all shapes, sizes, colors, and whatever. It seems possible, however, to check and cure it. He is even considering, as if that wasn't persecution, he is now thinking about more ways. So many things might be obvious in the way we stress things. One thing I'd like to point out, contagious superstition, pernicious superstition. Who is talking about these as contagious and pernicious superstition? Roman governors. Wait a second, who are they? They are people who are polytheists. They had the Roman pantheon. They were even willing to worship the emperor as God. So I come from India, and for Indians or Hindus, anything goes. Yeah. So what is your religion? Oh, that's fine. That's fine, because in comparison to what they have, these things are fine as long as you don't bother them. I consider 330 million gods to be gods. all sorts of things to be gods. Who are you? Or are you just calling that one person who seems like a reasonable guy to be God? Fine, no problem. I have no quibbles. You see what I mean? That would be the mindset of a polytheist. Anything can sit alongside them. But what is the polytheist here saying? Pernicious superstition and contagious. So the main thing here is, what could be superstition to even a polytheist who considers even people who are alive or dead to be gods? Well, I have one good candidate, which is someone who is dead and then comes back alive only once, in person, in this physical body. No other claim so far, even in the polytheist world, where they have all the annual dying and rising myths, but nothing in the same form, what we call resurrection. So disciples' belief in Jesus' resurrection, yes, that is implied, is an important point I'd really like to make. It's a conjectural point, but I think a reasonable conjecture. I think, unless people otherwise come up with, in the historical context, a better candidate as to why a Roman polytheist. But by the way, Tacitus wasn't just, he was a polyglot. He wasn't just a governor, he wasn't just similar to him, he wasn't just a historian, he was also a priest, an elite priest in the Roman temples of recognized honor. Yet he calls these things in the way, things related to Jesus in the way he calls, and similarly Pliny the Younger does also. In other words, clearly something is going on with what was claimed there. Disciples worship Jesus, are like unto God. So Christians, Christians didn't see Jesus as God. There are some random claims on gods. People at the park and elsewhere. Clearly, of course, the Bible would clearly disprove that, and other sources also clearly. So, okay, anyway, let's try and go through it. Suetonius, Lives of 12 Jesus. He is a historian. He is a professional historian. As far as what I can see from what I have read, is not of a great caliber as that of Tacitus in terms of brevity, accuracy, and so on. But he is still a recognized professional historian, Roman historian. So, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from Rome. Is a passage we have here, or a statement we have here. He couldn't even differentiate a Jew from a Christian. And you will find that in the book of Acts also, by the way. Jews were expelled from Rome. And a couple of people who became partners with Apostle Paul were people like that who were expelled from Rome because of things like these. Why were people, not even Archaics, be able to differentiate between Jews and Christians? Because Christians were Jews and plenty of Jews were Christians. It was very much considered to be a central Jewish thought during that time. Later on things changed, that's a different story. But in the first century, certainly, following Jesus the Messiah was considered to be a conservative Jewish thought. Not everyone accepted, but that's a different story. And not every Jew agrees with each other. Every Jew is able to put up with that disagreement. But they wouldn't dare to say this is not central Jewish thought, if you see what I mean. It's traditional, conservative Jewish thought. To an extent, some people can't even differentiate between Jews, ethnically Jews, and religiously Christians. Suetonius goes on talking about, in the period of another Caesar, he goes on to say, punishment was inflicted on the Christians, a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition. Again, you see a trend there. Again by a Roman. Mischievous superstition. Christians, a class of men. Punishment. So you find actually, this should be an evidence for persecution also. Oh yeah, because this is not specifically talking about persecution in Jerusalem, I haven't put that under the element that involves persecution in Jerusalem. For me, the in Jerusalem is very important. I'll come to that in a bit. Lucian of Samosata, what does he say? He writes a satire Whether it's imaginary or not is entirely not clear. People speculate that Peregrinus is perhaps a historical person, and he's just, Lucian is just looking at his life and he's sort of thinking, oh, he seems to be having a good life, and he's writing a satire based on that. He's supposed to be, at least in the story, whether he's historical or not doesn't matter. The story he's writing has a historical context, and the historical context is people seem to be abusing Christians, and the way they were abusing was Christians were very open-hearted, very friendly, willing to, don't care about money, don't care about earthly things, they are willing to listen to others and so on. They are very considerate, very gentle, and they were sold out for Christ to an extent. If you want to tell me about Jesus, come sit with me, tell me. I have all the time to listen. That kind of mindset you see. And it seems like some people had taken that for their own advantage, to earn money. And you see Paul, Apostle Paul and so on, writing about these things, where he says some people are ministering as a means to gain. But godliness in itself with contentment is great gain. Godliness is not means to great gain. And you see that happening. It was then that he learned the wondrous law of Christians by associating with their priest Peregrinus. Goes to be in Palestine with Christians, associating with their priests and scribes. How else could it be? In a trice he made them all look like children. He's already sort of portraying a higher picture of him. For he was a prophet, a cult leader, head of synagogue, and everything all by himself. A prominent man. He interpreted and explained some of their books and even composed many, and they revered him as a god. From here it's talking about Jesus. He interpreted and explained some of their books and even composed many. He's talking about Christians and related to that. Books and even composed many. And they revered him as a god. Made use of him as a lawgiver. Jesus had a new teaching, a new law. The behavior of them was to an extent, this is new law. Lawgiver, set him as a protector. See God and our protector. Next after that, other, to be sure, whom they still worship. Worship the man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. Okay, let me see. Ignore the points I made about the first part here for now. I need to confirm something. My memory fails now. This particular notes I made a while ago. My memory fails, so please ignore that part. Stick only to this part for now, please. The man who was crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. Crucified, we find the land area, we find the man, and we find the reason. The poor wretches have convinced themselves, first and foremost, that they are going to be immortal and live for all time. Why would Christians think that would be the case? Like if resurrection is not in their mind. So clearly people understood, these people don't care about this life. They seem to have a better idea. And they, for some reason, thought they were immortal. In consequence of which they despise death, they don't even care if they die, and even willingly give themselves into custody, most of them. Furthermore, their first lawgiver persuaded them that they are all brothers of one another after they have transgressed once. For all by denying the Greek gods and the worshipping that crucified sophist himself and living under his cross. Therefore they despise all things indiscriminately and consider them common property. Book of Acts. Communal living, common property. Receiving such doctrines traditionally without any definitive evidence. So, if any charlatan or trickster able to profit by occasions comes among them, he quickly acquires sudden wealth by imposing upon simple folk. So with me so far. So some quick conclusions from there. Jewish leadership were offended clearly. Crucifixion there. Disciples worship Jesus. Whom they still worship. Whom they still worship. The man, so ignore that part for a minute. I need to read the entire passage. By the way, for anyone who wants to read the entire story, I've given links. The translation of the entire story, which is not too much. It's just maybe half an hour read. But it's a very cumbersome read. It's a complex idea. It's not good writing, but this is good writing of that time, but not good business writing of today. Not clear enough, not simple enough. But if anyone wants to do that, please do. The last time I read this was many months ago, and so I've forgotten precisely the context of that. I really like to go back on that place. So please just stick to this for now, as talking about Jesus for now. Yeah? But he was worshipped, obviously, whom they still worship, the man who was crucified in Palestine, because he introduced this new cult into this world. Disciples worship Jesus. Persecution of early church in Jerusalem. How do we know? Well, of course, he's clearly talking about despising death. So obviously, they were able to demonstrate that. They despise. He's not talking about theoretical ideas. He's talking about clear evidence that he's seeing. So there was clearly persecution. Why do I say in Jerusalem? Roughly, we're talking about the homeland of the church. Now, why did I say this is an evidence for Jewish leadership being offended also? I think part of the reason was that I need to check this again. A couple of things come to my mind. Certainly things like the cult, new cult. So clearly, people there saw that as new stuff, not the old stuff. But on top of that, I think I had some other reason also, but let me come back on that also, as to why I said Jewish leadership were also clearly offended because of what happened. I think the other point, of course, is the fact that he is clearly mentioned to have been crucified in Jerusalem, in the nation of Israel. So clearly something has gone wrong. So I think I picked up on that to suggest that some enemies came up and they were the Jewish religious leaders. But let me come back on that more later, please. Evidence 8, Celsus, Platonist philosopher, according to Origen. Second century philosopher, his writings do not survive, but Origen is someone who picks up on some of the arguments he makes and comments on that. Next, he makes the charge of the Savior. So this is Origen writing, who is quote unquote a Christian. And so he's saying, charge of the Savior, right? It was by magic that he was able to do the miracles which he appeared to have done, foreseeing that others also having learned the same lessons and being haughty to act with the power of God are about to do the same thing. Such persons, Jesus would drive away from his own society, for he says he was brought up in secret and hired himself out as a workman in Egypt, and having tried his hand at certain magical powers, he returned from there, and on account of those powers gave himself the title of God. So the fact of Jesus claiming to be God is there. Let me come back to that in a bit. Power of God, acting in the power of God, doing signs and wonders, miracles and so on, certainly extravagant things related to him. The point here is, the context here is, Egyptians, or some people who were based in Egypt were already accusing Jesus. They were saying, oh, you learned all your tricks while you were in Egypt. Remember, of course, the Bible talks about Jesus being in Egypt as a child. And this is where people are very keen to find out where Jesus lived in the first 12 years of his life and so on. I think the Bible gives that detail in one line, which is in Nazareth, but and that's sufficient in the context of their passage. That one line, to me, refers about his 12 years, most of 12 years. But people obviously haven't read that carefully. And so the point that they were trying to make right at that time is that Jesus learned tricks which he employed. And you would begin seeing developments of various heretic ideas right from the 2nd century and so on. One of those is this. Of course, here we're talking about Gnosticism and knowledge about different things and so on. But you'd see various other ideas also developing right from the start, right from the 2nd century. And we find the indications of that even in the Bible, in the New Testament, where Paul warns about things, Peter warns about things and so on. So they are quite expected, recorded history in the first, during the time of the early apostles. Babylonian Talmud. What's the history of Talmud? Talmud is essentially the collection of rabbinic writings which were begun to be put together beginning in the 2nd century, going on up to the 5th century. So 2nd to 5th century is sort of the timeline for the writing of Babylonian Talmud. Two prominent Talmuds, one of which is Babylonian Talmud. A collection of writings from rabbis. The claim is that these were ideas which were handed down through centuries, generation after generation. That's the claim, but evidence-wise we haven't got evidence for that. So now, reading a small passage there, on the eve of Passover, Yeshu, Jesus is derogatorily referred to as Yeshu instead of Yeshua by people who want to undermine him. Yeshu was hanged for 40 days before the execution took place. A herald went forth and cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed his faith to apostasy." The fact that Jesus led, this particular passage refers to Jesus with, let's say, I'm giving a rough number, 80+% accuracy. Whether this is about someone else is possible, we just haven't got any other evidence. So there's no other issue around this time who fits in this pattern. So this is most likely Jesus, is the idea here. But beyond that, this is not written in a way which gives which makes us respect this as a solid historical account. Is I guess my point. The Talmud is not supposed to be. It was supposed to be a spiritual account, or quote unquote spiritual account, as much as anything else. Okay. Jesus, but if it is Jesus, it fits in really well. Jesus was hanged. Well, we might say, well, he was crucified. But we should appreciate, even in the book of Acts, by the way, when Peter preached, Peter referred to Jesus' crucifixion as hanging on a tree. And of course, we might know that the person who hangs on a tree is cursed, and that idea is referred to in scriptures. So, the fact that the crucifixion involves the law that comes from a tree, and the fact that you are hanging on it, this hanging, we shouldn't read that as necessarily the way we see traditionally hanging in the 21st century, if you see what I mean. So that's a very legitimate expression of crucifixion also. Crucified 40 days before the execution took place. What is this 40 days before? If we go through the account in the 4th Gospel, the Gospel which is called the Gospel of John, what we find is of course, the Jewish leadership were, including the Pharisees, and there were different kinds of Jewish leadership, by the way. Various quarters of the leadership decided that they were going to take out Jesus right from almost the start of Jesus' ministry. They were offended. Oh, you work on a Sabbath day, we'll kill you. Oh, you do this, we'll kill you. Oh, you do that, we'll kill you. But what we understand, if you go through the Gospel of John carefully, when Jesus brought back Lazarus to life, that's when momentum really changed. And we understand that particular event happened that happened, by the way, in the Passover. Jesus was killed on a Passover day, and Lazarus' resurrection happened when Jews had come from all over the world for purification to prepare for the Passover. And so the fact of the matter is, it's around a month or so from the actual Passover. So the 40 days is a reasonable estimate of when that particular change in momentum really happened. Time-wise it matches. And then they made public they made public essentially saying, don't join with him. We've had enough of him. Sort of announcements were made quite prominently. Lazarus' account is very, very interesting, very important. Why did the Lord wait for, was it 4 days before he raised up Lazarus? There were very important reasons. That was the last ditch effort from the Lord to demonstrate his power in a very obvious way at a time when plenty of even Jews living all over the world would be in the country and in a place which is very close to Jerusalem, in a family which is very related to religious Jews. So in all sorts of ways, Jesus wanted to really make use of the context. Anyway, so because of that, because of the fact that Lazarus rose, they wanted to kill Jesus and they wanted to kill even Lazarus, because they didn't even want the evidence to be around of resurrection, of any resurrection. So he's going forth to be stoned, which is an indication of the fact that we want to take him out. So that doesn't necessarily mean that's the means we're going to use. They were still arguing, how do we make sure this goes through smoothly? Because he has practiced sorcery. Did Jesus perform miracles, signs, wonders? Yes, he did. Even according to people who rejected him, religious authorities, yes, he did. The only difference here, the only point here is that they attributed that to negative powers, dark powers, which we see in the Bible also. What did they say when it came to Jesus? They said, you're doing this through the power of Beelzebub. That's what they accused him of, as recorded in the Bible, and so no wonder that's the idea captured here. And enticed Israel to apostasy. Did Jesus preach any new thing? Of course he did. And that's why following him was seen as apostasy, leaving the Mosaic, leaving what they considered to be Old Testament principles. So, particular Jesus, new teaching, miracles, Jewish leadership offended, planned to destroy Jesus, Jewish accusation, crucifixion. Yeah. So far, right? So you using these points is how I have constructed this table. Like I said, that's the crux of Jesus. I'm not saying, of course, Jesus has plenty of stuff on top of this, but that reasonably captures the Jesus that we are talking about, which is reasonably gives a framework for who we are asking others to follow. Alright, okay, now let's come to the final stage. What do we have? So let me go to the table again. So now that we have understood this table is reasonable, and that this filling in these numbers is reasonable, now let's try and see what left-hand column actually implies. Okay, so in terms of the left-hand column, if you see carefully, so Jesus, all these signs and wonders, God, and all those things here. So the Jesus we care about is who we see in the first 5 points. Someone who signs and wonders, new teaching, miracles, claimed extravagant things about himself, had disciples, and so on. Yeah. So the first 5 points clarify that that's roughly the Jesus of the Bible. And we can clearly see that he had suffered because of that. So he offended Jewish leadership, destroyed Jewish leadership, planned to destroy him, and they accused him, went to an extent enough to get rid of him. So he had offended the Jewish leaders that much. So that's clearly the crucifixion account that we care about. With me so far? Now, why do we take, and now if we move on, in regards to whether Jesus was crucified or not is very important, but that is not sufficient. This is why Paul says, if resurrection did not happen, all our things are in vain. If resurrection is the cornerstone of Christian belief, if resurrection never happened, just give up, get drunk or whatever, lie somewhere. Resurrection is the case, and therefore we understand this is serious business. We take this seriously. But for that, these extra biblical sources aren't testifying. No one is saying, I saw Jesus rose up from the dead. We ignore Josephus' account, so we're not caring about that particular italicized portion. Remember that? And we are focusing only on the rest. No one is saying, Suetonius isn't saying, we know Jesus rose up. And this, no one is saying that. So how do we deal with this? And that is where the other things come in. Even though they are not saying Jesus rose up from the dead, they are clearly testifying that the disciples believed that Jesus rose up from the dead, and that the disciples were willing to act in a way consistent with that. I know my master died. I know he told me he'll give me life. I don't care if I die now. That attitude you see. So, in terms of bringing these things together, what I'm going to say is, the extra biblical sources are indirect witnesses, not direct, not first hand, but second hand witnesses for the resurrection. And what I mean by that, I'm going to clarify in a couple of minutes. But before that, let me do this. So far, if you carefully note, we are treating the New Testament, the Gospel accounts of Jesus, as guilty until proven innocent. Remember, so far, I'm not. Of course, just using the Gospel accounts, I can't make, or anyone, when I say I can, people can make an account, a case to say Jesus rose up from the dead. There's no other way you can explain this, just by using that. But so far, just to make sure, just to give the idea, clearly, I am actually constructing the entire case from outside the Bible. So far. With me on that? Cuts of the Bible from outside the Bible. Did I look at any passage in the Bible so far? No. From outside the Bible. I want to make that clear, except even though, even using the Bible, we can give a legitimate case, logically reasonable case, philosophically valid case, historically valid case for things from the Bible alone. Okay, but we are taking the worst case scenario possible, going with only this for now. Now, with that in mind, I'd really like to establish that Jesus came back alive through the testimony of the extra biblical sources. And that is where the crucial thing I'm holding on to are 11, 13 and 14. The extra biblical sources are testifying for the fact that the disciples believed clearly of the resurrection. They really were. This is where the pernicious superstition, contagious superstition, they despised life, they considered them to be immortal. All those phrases come in. So they clearly believe in something more than what a Roman pantheon would believe in. And something to an extent the disciples thought they were immortal and so on. Resurrection. They are testifying disciples did that. And they are also testifying, I tried my best to persecute them. And other people of power tried their best to persecute them. Yet they stuck to the story. You see what I'm saying? 11, 13 and 14. Which means these people, extra biblical sources, are testifying that the disciples have a strong conviction of what they thought was true. The words here are very important. A terrorist wanting to be a suicide bomber means whether his beliefs on religion are credible or not, whether the religion itself is credible or not, the fact that he is willing to die means his conviction. He really thinks it is true. He could be entirely wrong. But that's not what we're talking about. The willingness to die means he is convinced it is true. But that entire thing which he is convinced about could be entirely wrong. He might not be able to think properly. He might not have resources properly. Or there could be all sorts of reasons why he might be wrong. But the fact of the matter is his conviction is very true, and that shows up in the willingness to die. Yeah, so far with me? And that same principle would apply anywhere, everywhere. It doesn't matter what religion we're talking about. Yeah, if you're willing to die, sensible people, I'm not talking about one or two people here and there who might be lunatics and so on. Sensible people in plenty of numbers, when they're willing to die, you know, well, their conviction is really true here. Now the only question pending would be, what is their conviction based on? Can we try and see if that is a logically coherent, meaningful belief that they have, on which they have the conviction? You see what I mean? In other words, right now where we come to is, I agree you are a reliable witness, you are testifying that you are serious about what you are talking about, but I am not sure if you can think through properly. Let me do the thinking through process on your behalf, is what we are doing now, is where we come to. And there, last maybe 5 minutes or so, right now, their crucial 3 elements of their own testimony. So, you are a reliable witness with firm conviction. When I say reliable, you're not lying to me. You're willing to even give up your life for this. So, I can see you take this seriously. And therefore, I want to take this seriously. Why do you want to do this? You might be completely wrong, but I'd like to hear from you. So I can clarify, oh, I see you're convicted, but your thinking isn't right. So let's look for their witness account. What are they saying as the basis for their conviction? 3 important points. They are saying, we saw Jesus dying, buried, and the tomb being sealed. We saw he was dead. No question about that. We know it to be true. It's a public event, not some secret event somewhere. We saw an empty tomb on the 3rd day and going forward. Anyone can question us, anyone can argue against this, whatever, but this is a public thing. We saw an empty tomb. And then these 2 are public. Only this is not public. We saw Jesus show up alive. This is not public, granted. And that is why the others haven't testified for this. And that is why we've gone to one more step in asking them why they think Jesus rose up. So there are 2 things are public, 1 isn't public. The question we need to ask is this a sensible... the question we need to ask is, can we put these things together despite the fact that this is still not public? And can we take this to be seriously valid despite the fact that this is not public? When I say we, I mean Emperor Nero, I mean anyone else who hasn't seen Jesus alive in person, show up to him. Can they take it seriously? That's the question we need to ask. Before we get to that, quickly, death, burial, resurrection, death, burial, sealed tomb. Jesus was judged as dead by who? By expert Roman executioners, not some Tom, Dick and Harry who doesn't know what to do. These were Roman executioners. When Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus went to gain the body of Jesus to bury, Pontius Pilate asked the centurion who was on duty to confirm that he was dead. And that's why you know the Peter saying, and they confirm, yeah, that's true. What are the details behind it and so on is for later discussion. But the fact of the matter is, experts testifying dead. Roman army, as you might know, if you know briefly even about histories of various military apparatuses, Roman army is arguably one of the best armies in the world, even comparing against armies of this world today. You know, it's very hard to say US army is better than Roman army because they backed it in different points in time. US army, the arms, the technology they have is much better. But in terms of organization and so on, it's arguably they're better than the Roman army a lot. Roman army is, in terms of meticulous discipline and so on, the best in the world in a timeless manner. And they were testifying. And we understand that some of the modern medical professionals are saying what they did was a reliable way of checking if someone was dead or not. The tomb that Jesus was buried in was that of a popular man, not just some random place where people can do all sorts of stuff and get away with. No, this is a popular area of Joseph of Arimathea was part of the council, which is the Sanhedrin, which is a 70 people group that in one manner governed the entire nation on top of the priestly leadership and the king leadership. This is part of another authority structure, the council, synagogue, Sanhedrin, a council of 70 elders. Joseph of Arimathea was one of them. He was a very prominent man, very wealthy. And that's why I said the tomb is not in a nobody's land. And likewise, Nicodemus was a teacher of the Jews. Why did he come to Jesus by night? Because he was very popular. He can't just go show up before Jesus and not be seen by others. He was a very popular man. And of course, on top of that, some of the women had known where Jesus was buried, and the tomb was sealed and guarded. 3-level protection there: the stone, the seal on the stone, and the Roman guard. 3-level protection for that. So that's first one. If anyone had any doubt in that, people could have argued at that time. The ones who led him to be crucified, they could have come and said, well, we have issues here. Don't spread our own rumors, there's a problem here. You see what I'm saying? So no one can argue on that. Empty tomb. Again, Roman guard. The claim of empty tomb was public. Anyone could have verified. Of course, the Christians are testifying, we saw the tomb empty. Few women disciples, including Mary Magdalene, later on by Peter and the writer of the Gospel of John, and so on. But the Roman guards were on duties, of course, even though they haven't come and testified. They implicitly testifying for the fact that when others are claiming that there was an empty tomb, we haven't got a better case to make. So we just leave it there. So they are, through their silence, testifying of the empty tomb. Now, post-burial appearances. To whom did he appear? Many people, various occasions. Mary Magdalene, few women, Cleopas and Simon, many other disciples, including 11 surviving apostles. Among other appearances, finally Jesus also ascended up into heaven when in the sight of disciples. So where do we go from here? The point is, we are now putting ourselves in the shoes of the disciples who are willing to die. And we're thinking through this on their behalf. I know the guy died. I know he was put inside the tomb. There were people protecting, securing 3-level protection tomb. The body isn't there. And at least 500, might be plenty more, at least 500 have testified we've seen him alive. The body isn't there. They're saying that we've seen him alive. What better case we have? What better proposal? What is the case that we can present? What's the name?
Option.
What better option have we got? Okay, well, 1 + 1 is 2. It has to be 2. Well, we can try for 5 minutes if we can come with some other answer. But after all this, we can only say there must be a connection between the tomb being empty, no body being there, and him showing up there. And how is that possible? Well, the term used for that is resurrection. The body comes up and he shows up. See what I'm saying? That's the only possibility, and that's the case for resurrection. Now, divinity. Of course, when preaching, we're also claiming Jesus to be God, not just some, like Lazarus. Lazarus also came back to life. That doesn't mean he's God. But Jesus is claimed to be God, and the reason is Lazarus didn't claim to be God, Jesus did claim to be God. And that's a crucial reason. How did Jesus claim to be God? And then that's another module. So we'll leave it at that for today. And we'll just say Jesus did claim to be God, and that's the reason why people worshipped him when they saw the resurrected Jesus, and even on multiple occasions before that. That's the straightforward case. It almost seems as if it's watertight, which is the case, but people still want to challenge it in a few different ways. What are the challenges, and how do we face those challenges? Let's see that in the fourth and final session, which would be, of course, a much shorter session. But in the meantime, just for now, for 5 minutes, any question at all so far?
Why do you say that that third point was not public?
Okay.
Because if 500 people saw him, Why is that not public?
Yeah, okay. Apologies. I have defined the words, the phrases I have used in the book a bit better. Sorry, the question.
I'll repeat my question.
Yeah.
Why is that third point not considered a public incident if there were 500 witnesses?
So, if there are 500 plus witnesses, why didn't I qualify that to be public? And the reason is simple. My argument is to take the worst case scenario and still argue that the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ is, the belief in that is inevitable. Worst case scenario. And if approaching this from the worst case scenario, when I say worst case, from a Christian perspective, to try and argue, try and play the devil's advocate as much as possible. And approaching from that perspective, I could say, well, it's only 500. Maybe they were all eluded. Who knows? Maybe they all group of the same, whatever. Maybe, and so on. Yeah, all sorts of arguments. So that's where, I'm sorry, by no means am I suggesting that 500 people could be deluded. I should have been careful. I think it's, I think I should be really careful. But my point purely is, it's not, the crucial point is the appearance of Jesus Christ was not available to anyone and everyone who wanted that to happen for him to verify. Whereas the other things were. I can go and, now not me, if I were in the first century, if I just heard the news, okay, I have a few hours at disposal, I'll go and visit the tomb now. That was available for anyone's inquiry. This was available for anyone's inquiry. It was a public event. Available, when I say public, available for anyone's inquiry. But this, you can't choose. The Lord Jesus chose who to show up to. You can't command him to show up to anyone or everyone. He just did to whoever he did. And so if you said, I want to really find out if it's true, we only say, well, I'm sorry, but that's something that he decides, not I or you. And that's the only reason. I apologize, 500 people deluded at one time? No. There's no indication of the fact that the disciples who are testifying, the ones who wrote remarkable books which are in the New Testament, some of the phenomenally logically sound documents I have seen are in the New Testament. Like I said earlier, I'm a computer science engineer. I can deal with zeros and ones. I can fairly quickly, if someone says something, I can fairly quickly say, that particular portion of what you're saying, it's a zero. That's how my mind works. It's a black and white. In a wrong statement, I can split things. Black and white. 0, 1, 0, 1, I can do. Reasonably. Logic. From that background, and I've read all sorts of computer books, all sorts of phenomenal computer science books. There are very, very deep computer science books. When it comes to Paul's writing of how he presents the New Testament doctrine, I can only say this clearly has to be God. There is no other explanation here. When even Peter writes in the way he writes, even though he's a mere fisherman, I can again say, you know what? We're not taught. Ignore everything. For me personally, remember earlier I said, people come from all sorts of different directions. For me personally, even if I didn't have any of these, just by reading the way things are constructed, I can say, you know what? This is not mere human working here. The point is, why did I go on to that? Yeah, so to claim that 500 could be deceived in the context of the quality of material that we see come from some of them would be totally unfair to them. It's not just unfair, it would be really, to be frank, I'd be a fool if I said that, which I did, and therefore I need to apologize. I shouldn't have said that. It's a slip of tongue, slip of mind in this case. I shouldn't have done that. All indications clearly say that the Christian community were reasonably clued up. They weren't fools. But the only thing I mean here is that you can't ask for this to be shown to you. The others you can.
And also,
Sorry.
also, if I think back on it now, God did not appear to anybody who was a non-believer that we're told of.
Yes. So yeah, Jesus had a very particular reason. Jesus doesn't want to spoon feed. I will clearly see in scriptures. He doesn't want to spoon feed. If he spoon feeds like some of the Christians, many of the Christians do today, he would have the entire world following him. But he didn't want to. At some stages, a few different stages, he sent people away, chased them away through the points he was making.
Any
Question?
Online, any question from the family?
There is one.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So, Arul, do you consider the Shroud of Turin as evidence?
Shroud of Turin. Personally, actually, I haven't studied the Shroud of Turin in detail. I know and appreciate that people are saying that in the historical context, it most likely should be of Jesus. But personally, I haven't studied that in detail so far, which is very unfortunate. I should really do that sometime soon. But I personally, so I have no comments on that for now. But I roughly remember, I briefly did go through some details about Shroud of Turin, and at the time I was reading, I was thinking, this is some good material here. Why I didn't follow up on that is a mystery to me. So when I do study, perhaps I'll be able to give my considered thoughts on that. Apologies to whoever asked that. Sorry. Any other question?
Just the comment on the passage on Peregrine. I've looked it up.
Okay.
The reason is it's because it's talking about Peregrine.
Is that switched on, brother? I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's basically because it's talking about Peregrine and how he deceived the Christians.
Yes.
Into worshipping him. So you're right to leave out the first part.
Yes, because after I read the first part, I vaguely remembered actually I had to consider. It's a very tricky passage, by the way. It's not simple. It's not written in a simple style. So it's highly complex. When I read through the entire thing, I thought, you know what? Was he even a popular writer? That was the thing that came to my mind. But of course, thinking at that time might have been very different. But thank you, brother, for that. Because when I read this again, I vaguely remember going through this complex thinking at that time, and I'm thinking, you know what? This particular first part most likely is Peregrinus, not Jesus himself. And that's why after I mentioned this, I thought maybe I should check this again. But thank you very much. So you are confirming now that the first part which I said, please ignore. Just focus on the last line. The first part does correspond to Peregrinus himself.
Greg would like to know if there is any chronological charts of these events, with who was ruling and the time.
With the life of Jesus, is there a Christian asking some material to study? Yeah. Okay. So I'm trying to understand the context.
I think like the evidence that you were giving, if there is like a chronological chart.
So I have prepared a detailed chronological summary of how I see, based on my studies, of how we order different events. I've done that so far, and hopefully that will be shared sometime soon. Operation Josiah, like I said, preparing, training teachers and so on. That's when some of those things are important and will come out. Are there charts like that already around? I'm sure there would be.
There's the book by, is it Wenham, where he goes through the various resurrection stories, putting them in order and giving up reasons why there's differences. There's there's a book by, I think it's Wenham, who goes through the resurrection, the biblical story of the death, burial, and resurrection. Then I'm sure Joshua Dow does a quick one in his Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and I'm sure there's one other somewhere along the line that I've come across, but I can't remember now.
Yeah, so certainly, I don't know, the people who joined us for Module 1 would know that I showed a Bible that I wanted to show also, the Open Bible, which has some good study material, and that has some basic elements of synchronizing the chronology between the Gospels and so on. So certainly there are material which is around. One of the bad things with me is that I always like to do my first principles based study. Go to the ultimate sources and then try to do the work myself, which is a good thing in one regard, but maybe not good in terms of answering some of these questions. So I've seldom read other people's reference, but our brother has mentioned a name here and a couple of names there. So hopefully we'll be able to pass those details around to the wider audience.
I think this is a question. Did people spread the rumors and say that the people of Christ came and took him from the tomb?
Did people?
If people spread the rumors and say that the people of Christ came and took him from the tomb.
Okay, so what is called the stolen body theory. So that's for the last session. So challenges to the particular argument we have raised, we look at these challenges in maybe half an hour or so after a break. Yeah, after a break.
Should we go? See, this is the same subject.
No, maybe 5 minutes, but at least 5 minutes. I was hoping for the break to be 15 minutes, as a matter of fact. But
you can lecture open 15 minutes, as opposed to like shut it down and then start right here.
Okay, well, either way is fine. With Operation Stephen chat room, what we do is we shut down and then open it again in how much time? So we've got some time now. The last part is relatively simpler. Anyway, it was only for 1 hour, worst case. But we'll try and do it in half an hour. So let's regroup in.
I think we should continue. It's only 30 minutes, no point.
No,
Wait,
I think
30
we
minutes.
should get like at least 10 minutes.
Yeah. Let's do 10 minutes break.
Okay.
With the questions and everything, it might be actually.
Okay.
Yeah, people can think through.
Yeah.
So 10 minutes, in 10 minutes. Yeah, JC?
Yeah.
No problem. So but we can keep Soko live. So in 10 minutes, we'll be back. Thank you.